This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back Inside the Paint. I want to recap what we said right here at the top of the show and just kind of give people some insight into what you're hearing as far as Kyle Lowry goes and kind of set this up. You had essentially been told a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a week ago, time's getting away from me, but that it was no longer, basically you were told don't ask about this anymore, right? Like basically it was, this is now indefinite. We're not even really checking in. We're checking in to make sure he's okay, but we're not even checking in to see when he's coming back at this point. But now, from what you're seeing today, it sounds like the time for Lowry's return is a lot closer.
Yes,
than
that's the exact word, that Kyle is close to returning. Look, he has a lot of contacts in Toronto. A lot of people know about what's going on, and that's where the word came from late last night after the game. I checked in with some people, and the thought is, yes, that it is soon, that we finally have that little bit of turn, that we know we're getting closer to him coming back. It's going to be interesting, Clay, because he can't come back as a 40-minute player. He's been gone now for 9 games. We're talking almost, a couple of weeks, almost a month here. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out as far as what kind of role he comes back. I assume it'll be starting, but what kind of minutes he comes back in. The good thing is the Heat are past the back-to-back part of their schedule. So they will be able to take, a breather a little bit between games. It won't be anything like the 4 and 5 that they just got through, which is why it made sense to wait. And also the situation we saw last night in Toronto, no fans. It looked like the bubble. It looked like last season. It hardly was the way to make his comeback to Toronto anyway. The Heat have 1 game left in Toronto this season, the second to last Sunday this season. That will be a back-to-back, though, off a game in Chicago. So it will be interesting to see how the Heat play that. The Heat will be closer to whole. Now my other question is, and again, I'm not going to sit here and just spout out what I think. Clay, how many times in the last month, 6 weeks, has Markieff Morris given us a hint that he's close? Put on his Twitter account and his Instagram, sort of the question marks, and the smiley faces. And yet every time we look, he's still not there. So that's the other thing they need also. You can see times when they take PJ Tucker out. They're not playing 2 centers together. They tried that for like 5 minutes with Dedmon and Adebayo in Boston. That you'd have another tough muscle guy coming in. God bless Caleb Martin for what he does. Or when they play small, move Max Strus or Jimmy Butler up.
Yeah, much different
still 2 more elements,
right. Right. That's interesting. Yeah, and I haven't even thought about it. It's almost like Kyle, like you see the tangible difference immediately because he starts and all that. But you're right. There are times certainly when you look at that, you say, "Oh wow, they could really use Markieff Morris right now." So
3 months.
I get that. So
it's been 3 months since we've last seen Markieff Morris. Yeah.
So not that you need me to publicize all your stuff, but keep following Ira. He's going to let you know immediately when anything breaks on that Ira Heat beat on Twitter. So you mentioned the schedule and upcoming now. I've said it, and maybe I'm just being prisoner of the moment. I had some concerns about those losses these last few days. But the way the schedule is setting up right now, and you hear this all the time from Eric Spoelstra about how much he loves long road trips because it gives this team a chance to kind of come together and the guys don't have any choice but to hang out with each other and all that. You're away from the distractions of being home and all that. You combine that with the fact that these next 4 games, they're all winnable, all quite winnable. And you could see a world where they come out the other side of this thing, they finish 4-0 on this trip. And it's hard to do that because, it's like, hey, schedule game, it never quite works out like you want. But let's say you get back Kyle Lowry, either in San Antonio or the next game.
Charlotte.
Let's say that there's this, everybody hits the floor and they act like they've played together for 20 years type of thing. And everybody kind of picks up right where they left off. Do you think these next 4 games could be a situation where you look back a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months when the playoffs start down the line and say, that's it. That was the moment where everything clicked. Everybody got back together in the comment. Because we've seen it. It was, I remember the year where they went 30-11 the second half of the season. And Spo always talked about the game that they lost at Golden State. But it was kind of on that road trip where everything kind of came together and it felt like the season really changed for them. Do you think we could be kind of coming on to that sort of a moment in this season?
We could be, but I'm actually glancing at the Heat schedule I have over my desk here, and I think the real time is March. The Heat, the way they print out their schedule, the blue games are the home games, the red games are the road games. And when you look at March, it's nothing but blue. I mean, it's almost like one of those political maps, with the blue states and you have all your coastal elites or whatever. I think March is go time for the Heat, when they will be home, have practice time, and can really maneuver. Because Clay, even on this trip, the Heat played last night in Toronto, but are traveling today, which takes today away as a practice day. They play in San Antonio on Thursday, but are traveling on Friday to Charlotte, which takes Friday away from practice day. Play Saturday in Charlotte, but not fly to Washington until Sunday. So Eric Spoelstra did not set up this trip where they would have a lot of practice time. He did the opposite. He set up this trip, there'd be a lot of sleep time. There'd be a lot of recuperation. No more midnight flights out of a city. They arrived in Toronto about 2 a.m. on Monday. It was a back-to-back, Tuesday morning, rather. They had no choice. So I think Eric Spoelstra has sort of set this up as survival mode. Then you go to the All-Star break. Then you get your week off, and then comes March. And again, if anyone looks at a Heat schedule, March is nothing but a homestand. It's like a 20-game homestand. For you and I, talking nothing about road games so far this season on our Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show, all of a sudden that changes in March. So I think March is go time. I think March is comfort zone time. I think March is bring it all together time. There will be practices. There will be time for guys to sleep in their own beds. I think that's when we'll know. I think this whole season, the way the schedule has been set up is get us to March. And March is after the February 10th trading deadline.
Mm-hmm.
March is after the March 1 buyout deadline for playoff eligibility. It's the perfect time to reassess who you are and what you are, and also have a much better read on where you stand with Victor Oladipo. Because at some point, you need to get him in there.
I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question is, has this last week, has it changed at all your view on what this team may or may not need to do, both with the trade deadline looming and also, as you mentioned, that March buyout date looming?
Yeah, I don't think they need to make a move if they can get to health, because they have enough. I sound like Eric Spoelstra right now, but I really do think that they have enough what's waiting in the wings. And look, to me, as big as last night's Heat game was, when the Heat rolled out something during their broadcast on Bally Sports Sun last night and showed Victor Oladipo working pregame yesterday, to me, what was not as fascinating was a 2-on-2 game of Victor Oladipo, Kyle Guy, Chris Silva, and Udonis Haslem. But what was interesting was this was pregame. Eric Spoelstra was on the bench. He is never courtside before a game. He's in his office strategizing. Andy Ellisberg was courtside. Typically, Andy will arrive on a later bus right before the game. He was there. The Heat coaching staff was courtside, and Jimmy Butler was courtside. He does not come out on the road very often before a game and wind up in the situation, where he's sitting on the bench there. So yes, Victor worked before the game. It was only 2-on-2. But believe me, if that was just some innocuous random session, you wouldn't have had Eric Spoelstra and Andy Ellisberg and Jimmy Butler and the coaching staff watching it. So I think we're getting closer to go time there. And again, Clay, I know you can throw me the Bradley Beals and others, but I almost defy people on the chat board there, when they're not slamming or whatever he says, the like button there, is I'm not sure you can give me a better name for this Heat mix than a Victor Oladipo who knows the playbook, who's been working with the team for months on end to add at the deadline, versus another player. This Victor Oladipo thing is real. And the fact that the Heat allowed that video to air on their broadcast, how they are. I mean, this is like the CIA with the Heat. What Victor Oladipo workout? I don't know what you're talking about. No, that wasn't Andy Ellisberg. That was someone who looked like, they put it out there like that. I thought that was fascinating. That's why I changed and wrote my blog on that last night.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm glad you dropped that nugget again. Make sure you read Ira's blog on that, because that's really good stuff. And I think, when you kind of like try to parse things with this organization as much as you can, because they're not going to let stuff out. They don't want stuff out that they don't want out there. So the fact that all that happened, that's really interesting to me. And I want to circle back to your point about Victor Oladipo and him being the best name that you could add to this mix. And I've been somebody who's been a big proponent of Bradley Beal for a while now. It's funny because I watched him a bit more, because I remember watching him at Florida and being like, oh, this is a baller right here. Not that, I mean, everybody could tell, but I was like, oh, that's the type of guy that can elevate your franchise. And so I've kind of watched him at Washington since he got there. And then I remember, I could say this now because it's a few years removed from the fact, I remember being at a Heat game, and you've got that table down there where it's like this rotation of sometimes Zoe is sitting there,
In the corner,
sometimes
yeah.
Glenn Rice, sometimes
Mhm.
Pat Riley, sometimes Andy Ellisberg. And I just happened to be there at a game when Andy and Pat were there. And they were watching the Heat game, obviously. I want to say they were playing the Raptors, but on their iPad in front of them on League Pass, they had the Wizards game on. And I was like, oh, okay. So Bradley Beal has been somebody, and I think this was when John Wall was hurt. So it wasn't like they were watching John Wall. I mean,
Right.
this is something that has been on their mind for a long time, and I know that's since been reported. So this isn't
Right.
breaking any sort of a news. I'm saying all this because I think I may finally be in the place that I don't think this team needs a Bradley Beal anymore. I think that when you saw what this team was early in the year, the way everything came together, and I'm not saying you couldn't use that type of a score late in games, especially
Absolutely.
with kind of the struggles we've seen with Jimmy Butler lately. But with what you would potentially have to give up to get a Bradley Beal, I wouldn't want to mess with a core that I think is championship ready. And I think this core is championship ready if they fix some little things over these next few weeks and heading into the playoffs. I think I'm finally at the point where, for the first time maybe since I got here, that I don't know that this team needs a whale. I think this team needs somebody like a Victor Oladipo to come in and kind of add to the mix that's already there. Am I going too far the other way on this, or are you kind of
No,
in
no,
line
I,
here
I
with what
agree
they've
that,
gotten to be enough?
and that's what I'm trying to say is, and also a continuity standpoint. You've worked with these guys for months on end. We're at a
Yes.
normal NBA season again. There are 82 games. There's still enough time to get things taken care of. And you still have that week, if you're a top 6 team, of no games before the playoffs start as the play-in teams play. So you can have that mini camp that Pat Riley always had with his Knicks teams and some of his Heat teams right before the playoffs. But again, you could say, matter of fact, I'll turn it the other way. So you feel comfortable, it seems, on the wing that you have perhaps a Victor Oladipo coming back. We know we have a Kyle Lowry eventually coming back. So to me, the position of need sort of has been power forward. And we saw that in Boston on Monday when you didn't have PJ Tucker. You were sort of mixing and matching and trying for something, but you have Markieff Morris out there also. So I'd say the only way or reason I would feel a need to make a trade is this. Do they know something more about Markieff Morris's neck than we do with the whiplash? Is there a vertebrae resting against a nerve that simply looks like it won't get handled this season and that there's a risk of greater injury if he plays? If they know that Markieff Morris is coming back and they know that Victor Oladipo can come back, then I think you can sort of stand pat with what you have. The other thing is, Clay, and that's this. Or do you at any point jeopardize, not to say jeopardize this season, but change your dynamic because of the future? Because you have to pay Tyler Hero probably his extension sometime by next October. Because you might have to pay Victor Oladipo. So do you look at the long term of the cap and saying, hey, if we can offload this Duncan Robinson contract now and move the money to someone else, maybe we have to consider it? I say unequivocally no. Not when PJ Tucker's 36, not when Kyle Lowry's 35, not when Jimmy's 32, that this is your window now. Let the future handle itself. Worry about whether you can sign Caleb Martin another time. That's a front office thing. So how much does the front office enter the equation?
And Cedell asked this, and I smiled because he said, hey, look, the Heat questions are here because the chat is largely, and understandably so, the chat is largely right now Dolphin-centric. He does ask, because he's hopping in late, he missed the Kyle Lowry update and what you said earlier. So can you just kind of recap where that stands?
Is that Kyle Lowry? It looks like finally we have an idea that it's going to, if not imminent, probably in the next few days, Kyle is going to make every effort to rejoin the Heat. I don't know about San Antonio on Thursday. I would think probably or possibly by Charlotte on Saturday. It's still fluid, but now the word out of Toronto last night was when everyone was waiting for Kyle's return back to where he played for 9 seasons, won the 2019 championship, is that he's moving in a direction of getting back to the Heat. So I guess I'd say this way, there is optimism of seeing Kyle Lowry back with the Heat sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and to kind of build on the point that you said earlier too, Lowry still has a lot of contacts in Toronto, and the Heat, we know, I mean, it's Fort Knox, man. They don't let anything out that they don't want out, and it was pretty clear that they wanted everything silent as much as they could on Kyle Lowry. They wanted to give him time they wanted to respect what he's going through and be able to come out on the other side of it without any sort of feelings of pressure from the organization. But, when you end up going to Toronto and there's some more Kyle Lowry contacts there, that some of the stuff may end up coming out. We'll probably talk about this more on the other side, but to your point about not necessarily going after a guard, but maybe a big. That I guess maybe if you wanted to go after a bigger type name or something, and I don't know that this player you would necessarily consider a whale, but somebody who's always kind of piqued my interest a little bit is Brandon Ingram with New Orleans, because I think it was pretty clear that there wasn't that fit with him and Zion Williamson. They tried to make it happen. Now Zion's out. Ingram's playing really, really well. We've heard Christian Wood a bit. So I guess if you're going to look at a big name, and you almost have to look at it from this perspective, would this player make you better, not just down the stretch, but also in the future, based on like what you just said, the money that you have allocated to Duncan Robinson, could that money be used elsewhere? Because I think we've brought this up on the show before. Almost no deal could be made unless Duncan Robinson is a part of it.
Well, I have one, and I'll tell you after the break, and it might be someone they might be able to put in their suitcase in San Antonio and bring home. So after the break, we'll get to that.
And it would not require Duncan Robinson in the deal if we're talking about the same player. So we'll get to that and a lot more coming up on the other side right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.